We're going to start in just a moment with Katie McLean from the Clean Annapolis River Project, and she'll be one of two presenters in this final round for the day. And the topic here is again on adaptation, and firstly on an application for adaptation in farms and in so a different sector we really haven't talked about yet. And then we conclude with a presentation on leadership and collective action before our closing remarks. So Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you and invite you to share your screen and take it away. Thanks so much.
Great. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Excellent. And you should now be able to see my slides.
Yes.
Just gonna find full screen. Okay. So hello, everyone. Leaf's already introduced me, but my name's Katie McLean, and I work with Clean Annapolis River Project. And for those who are maybe unfamiliar with our organization, we are a community-based NGO with an office located in Annapolis Royal. And we're really driven by our mission, which is to enhance the ecological health of the Annapolis River watershed through science, leadership, and community engagement. And up here in the photo, you can see what would be our watershed boundaries. Although more and more we're engaged in projects that go beyond these boundaries as we get involved in regional, provincial, sometimes Atlantic Canada-wide initiatives. And so one of those more regional initiatives that I'll quickly talk about relates to conservation planning for agro ecosystems in Guestwick, or the area of Southwest Nova Scotia. So as many of you are aware, Southwest Nova Scotia has been identified as a priority place for biodiversity conservation. And there have been ongoing efforts over the past few years to undertake a strategic planning process to assess threats and develop strategies that address these threats. And so with such a high prevalence of agriculture in our watershed area, it's a target we were particularly interested in and have been taking the lead on. And so what you can see up here is where we've gotten in terms of ranking top-rated threats to agro ecosystems in Guestwick. And the input from this comes from both the conservation and science community, as well as producers themselves. What's notable is that 3 of our top-ranking threats, and this is only a subset of the total number of identified threats, all directly relate to climate change. So on top, you can see more irregular water tables due to climate change. So periods of both drought and flooding, not just one, but we get both at different times of the year. More irregular temperatures due to climate change. So hotter summers. If you remember a few years ago, there was a spring frost that was pretty devastating, particularly for apple producers in the region. But we're also anticipating to see larger outbreaks of crop pests, especially since they're going to have both favorable day and nighttime conditions through the summer season. And then a little lower down on the list, we see more frequent and severe high wind events due to climate change. So those hurricane and severe storms, which might be more important to you depending on your commodity. But again, for orchards, even corn fields that can get blown over if they don't have adequate shelter belts and cover, can be a pretty significant impact. So I wanted to connect kind of some of what I'm going to talk about today into some of that strategic planning that so many of us have spent hours on webinars for in the past year or so. So managing water on the farm has always been paramount to success, climate change or not. From an agricultural perspective, one thing that people often don't recognize is that we actually have no class 1 soils in the province in terms of agricultural soil capability, but we do have areas of class 2 to 4 soils. So the valley would be a good example of a place where we have a lot of class 2 soils. So they're considered suitable for cultivated crops, but they still have their challenges. And one of these challenges can be excess water. So a fairly common technique that's used to manage this excess water is some type of drainage structure. So you'll hear the term, I'll probably interchange tile drainage or subsurface drainage. And so the name tile drainage comes from a time when fired clay tiles would have been used as the structures. You can see in the photo here, though, we now have flexible plastic piping that's used instead. And so from a producer's perspective, there's a lot of benefits to drainage. It accelerates the rate at which water moves off the land. It can help improve yields, reduce yield variability, reduce surface runoff, and all of this helps to make agriculture possible and more profitable. And sometimes the need for a tile drain system isn't always immediately obvious. So you're going to see some photos ahead in the presentation of the demonstration site we worked at, which you look at and you're like, that is a beautiful, sandy, well-drained soil. But there's actually a lot of areas, so estimated at about 70% of agricultural soils in Nova Scotia that have a compacted subsoil within 80 centimeters of the soil surface. So this constricting layer ends up limiting soil's internal drainage, which is a challenge farmers need to work around. So pretty clear benefits from the producer's perspective in terms of drainage. But unfortunately, because that drained water is flowing into an outflow pipe and often discharged directly into some type of natural receiving water, it also has the potential to become a point source of pollution. And so up here, you can see the data from our most recent year of water quality sampling through the Annapolis River Guardians program. This is a program we've been conducting since 1992. And we use the information to identify long-term trends. And one of the ways this information is presented is to use the water quality index, so a score that's calculated using E. coli, dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, and nutrient data. And on this map, you can see the results from last year compared to the 2019 season. And we can see that in a lot of cases, we end up having marginal or actually no poor conditions last year, but quite a few marginal. In part, nutrient pollution is one of the contributors to this low score. And this is a trend that's been observed for years. One thing I do want to throw out there and make sure is clear, agriculture is not the only potential source of nutrient pollution. So we also need to be thinking about things like septic systems and overflow from wastewater treatment plants. But it certainly is a contributor in our watershed area. And so excessive nutrients can lead to a condition known as eutrophication, so where you have nutrient-enriched water conditions. This can provide suitable conditions where algae can feed on nutrients, and they'll start by growing into an unsightly scum on the surface of the water, which has impacts on recreational value. It can clog water intake pipes. Eventually, those decaying mats of dead algae can produce foul tastes and odors in the water. And that decay from bacteria can also consume dissolved oxygen, which can lead to things like fish kills. So you also get those mats blocking the penetration of light. So you can really have a number of different changes to aquatic ecosystems that result from those type of conditions. And I bring this up because, we're definitely concerned about ways we can address potential nutrient inputs. And we're interested in ways we can look at working with farmers, both to ensure that they're able to continue successfully with their work, but also to identify opportunities to mitigate environmental risks within their operations. And this project is kind of a nice place where climate change and other environmental concerns come together in a bit of a win-win situation. So in terms of reducing nutrient pollution in receiving waters, there's lots of different strategies, and it usually takes a combination of strategies to really be effective. So I've made some generalizations of what we can do here. So first, we can take steps to reduce the amount of nutrient or fertility available in runoff. And so one of the things we can do is develop a nutrient management plan to ensure supply is adequate but not excessive. Again, there's a win-win in here because there's a direct financial cost to fertility. And so if we can reduce cost to producers, it's an incentive to them. Second, we can look at options for reducing the movement of water and soils across fields to try to stop runoff from entering natural receiving waters. So we can use techniques like cover cropping, conservation tillage, and the creation of riparian buffers, usually again in some combination. Things like cover cropping have other climate change related benefits. So having that year-round cover really helps to reduce surface erosion that's caused by wind. It's a technique that when we were talking to farmers, they get it. And it's something that we're seeing become the norm over time, which is really fantastic. And then finally, if needed, we can look at options for removing pollutants after the release into natural receiving, before their release into natural receiving waters. So using some type of natural infrastructure like an artificial wetland, maybe a wood chip bioreactor. Okay, so at this point, we know subsurface drainage is something producers need, and we have negative environmental impacts potentially occurring because of this. We also know farmers are very concerned about seasonal availability of water, with too much water in the spring and too little during the growing season. So what can we do about it? And that's what this project sought to address. So in 2018, with funding from Environment Canada through the Gulf of Maine Initiative and a little additional funding from RBC, we were able to undertake a relatively small-scale demonstration project, which explored the use of controlled drainage as a tool to help improve producers' ability to manage the water table in their tile-drained fields. In addition to the benefit of giving more ability to retain water during the growing season, this is also a tool that can be used to help reduce nutrient runoff into receiving waters. So a controlled drainage structure works in tandem with a drainage system. They can be retrofitted into an existing system, which is what we did in this case, or to be more cost effective, they can be installed at the same time as a new system. And they're really basic technology. So they use a series of stop logs that can be added or removed to control the height of the water table. So if you take a look at the Cutaway diagram on the right, you'll be able to see about 5 stop logs. And those are used to set that desired maximum height of the water table, and then adjusted based on the season and plant activities. So after harvest, you'd want to install stop logs to hold water back within about 30 centimeters of the surface. And that would remain through the winter months to try and help hold nutrients that would otherwise wash away during winter rains and snowmelts. And by reducing rapid drainage downstream, flood risk and ecological damage is also reduced. So in the winter, we want to hold as much water in the fields as possible. Then when we move into the spring, about 10 days before planting, stop logs will be removed to allow free drainage. And this is going to allow you improve field access, let those soils dry out so that you're not going to cause a lot of compaction and rutting. And then after planting, you're going to replace your stop logs. And the exact height might depend on crop as well as your predicted precipitation for the season. The recommendation is bringing them up to about a depth of 2 feet or more if possible. Anything shallower can end up increasing your risk of surface erosion because you can end up with water pooling on the surface. And then again, about 10 days before harvest, you're going to remove your stop logs to lower that water table to improve your ability to get on the field without damaging soil.
We're just at about the 2-minute mark.
Okay, great. I'll power on. You've been able to read the stats up here, so I don't have to talk about them, but it is a proven technology in terms of the ability to reduce your nutrient loads in receiving waters as well as improve yield, although there's quite a bit of variability based on the specific site. And so we partnered with Spur Brothers Farms on a property they own and manage in South Farmington. We were looking for a site with a relatively flat grade, so under 2%. And really, you can use this technology on steeper grades, but you end up needing to create a terrace system. So there's an increased capital cost because you need to install more structures. And like always, budget was one of our limitations with this project. And so you can see on the diagrams here, we worked to retrofit these structures into an existing drainage system and end up impacting about 10 hectares on 2 fields. And in terms of our kind of estimated unit cost, we worked with the hard numbers and divided up some of those costs that would have expanded across the 4 units, like excavation. So you can see the cost per structure in this case worked out to about $1,660. Of course, there's some savings that would be realized there. If you were going to do multiple structures, you're probably going to see the same float fee if you're bringing in equipment. So you wouldn't have such a high unit cost for those types of pieces of the work. And just because we're short on time, the potential issue I really want to focus on is actually the fact you require some precipitation to hold back for this to be effective. And that's one of the pieces we're hoping to do some monitoring for, to understand, like, during these extended periods of drought during the summer, is there actually even enough water in the soil that we're able to hold it back and make a difference? Or are we just experiencing such extreme drought that water's falling away from the root zone of crops anyway? And so that's something that remains to be answered in this particular site. But we do have a series of monitoring wells that have been set up. And we're working with partners with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Perennia, and Department of Agriculture to come up with a monitoring plan so that we can do some of this site level monitoring in the coming year or years, hopefully. And one of the great things with this project is it has led to additional partnership opportunities. So I'd mentioned that there was some pretty serious soil or surface erosion going on. So up here, you can see a photograph of 2 of the contractors we work with who helped out with some ditching and grading and installation of kind of block areas with rock. And then these ditches will end up being planted with a permanent perennial cover so that we can hopefully direct and slow down water to reduce the amount of sediment that's being transported into the adjacent watercourse. And it's also led to the opportunity to develop an agricultural biodiversity conservation plan, which is hopefully going to lead to more partnership opportunities with this farm. And so again, like, one of the things I think that's most important as I guess a lesson learned is a project like this is an example where there's a clear benefit or potential benefit to the farmer, and we can also integrate benefits to the environment or biodiversity. I think finding those places of overlap is where we need to focus in order to develop strong working relationships with target sectors like the agricultural community, where maybe in some cases there's been a rocky history of collaboration in the past. And so that probably wraps up my time or even takes me over. So thank you, and I will monitor the chat box for any questions.
Thank you, Katie. That's great. And thank you so much for bringing us the information from the farming communities and the work that's being done there on climate and erosion and biodiversity. Very win-win-win for sure. So thank you for that. And yes, please monitor the chat. And I know there's some kudos rolling in there. And please post your questions to Katie.